The silence was the first sign. Not the productive hum of servers or the distant murmur of late-night coding sessions, but a dead, digital void where my life's work used to be. I stared at the error message on my terminal. It's sterile, white. Letters mocking me from the glow of the screen in my darkened office. Access denied. My name is Kaelen Vance. Most people call me Kay. At 29, I was the head of innovation at Ethereum Dynamics, a title that sounded grander than it felt. In reality, I was a glorified architect of dreams, sketching the blueprints for the future of human consciousness. My team and I weren't just writing code. We were teaching machines to speak the silent language of the mind. Our project, codenamed Synapse, was a non-invasive neural interface, a sleek silver diadem that could translate pure thought into digital action. It was elegant, it was revolutionary, and it was mine. I'm a creature of logic. My world is one of data points, verifiable outcomes, and elegant algorithms. I trust in the clean binary certainty of ones and zeros. Emotions are messy variables, prone to irrational exceptions. That's why I trusted Marcus Thorne. He wasn't just the CEO of Ethereum, he was the constant in my life's equation. He'd taken me in as a raw, ambitious intern 10 years ago, fresh out of MIT, with a head full of theories and a heart full of fire. He saw the spark in me, he said. He mentored me, challenged me, and eventually gave me the keys to the kingdom, the resources and freedom to build Synapse from the ground up. He was more of a father to me than the man who had donated his DNA. I loved him with a fierce, data-proven loyalty. And that's why the access denied message felt like a catastrophic system failure in the core of my own being. It wasn't just a network error. It was a betrayal that defied all logic. My fingers, usually so nimble on the keyboard, felt thick and clumsy as I tried my master override codes. Access denied. Access denied. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into my veins. This wasn't a glitch. This was a lockout. Deliberate. Surgical. I pushed back from my desk, the wheels of my chair silent on the polished concrete floor. The Ethereum campus, nestled in the heart of Silicon Valley, was usually a hive of activity, but tonight it was unnervingly still. The big presentation was tomorrow morning. We were set to unveil Synapse to a consortium of investors, a deal, led by the behemoth Omnigen that would secure our funding for the next decade. It was the culmination of 3 years of relentless work, of sleeping on cots in the lab, of subsisting on stale pizza and the intoxicating thrill of discovery. My first thought was Julian Croft, my lead programmer, my right hand, my friend. He was ambitious, a shark in a sea of coders, but I'd always believed his ambition was yoked to our shared vision. I strode from my glass-walled office, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous main lab. The prototype, our beautiful Synapse diadem, was gone from its pedestal. The servers that housed its terabytes of foundational research were dark. The entire lab had been stripped bare, leaving behind nothing but the ghosts of our innovation. Panic, that messy, illogical variable, began to bubble in my chest. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Marcus's name. Before I could call, an email notification lit up my screen. It was a company-wide memo from the board of directors. Effective immediately, Kaelen Vance's employment with Ethereum Dynamics has been terminated. We thank her for her contributions and wish her well in her future endeavors. The words blurred. I read them again, and again. It felt like trying to parse corrupted code. It made no sense. Terminated? Me? The night before our triumph? My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Julian. I'm sorry, Kay. It was just business. You have to understand. Attached was a link to a press release, embargoed for 8 a.m. the next morning. My fingers trembled as I clicked it. Omnigen acquires Ethereum Dynamics in landmark deal, Julian Croft to lead integration. of revolutionary OmniLink technology. OmniLink. They had already rebranded it. They had stolen my child and given it a new name. The text was a corporate eulogy for my career, filled with praise for Marcus's visionary leadership in securing the deal and Julian's unparalleled genius in developing the technology. My name was nowhere to be found. I was a footnote, erased from my own story. The truth hit me then, a physical blow that staggered me. This wasn't just Julian's ambition. He didn't have the authority to orchestrate a coup of this magnitude. He was a pawn, albeit a willing one. The king who had sacrificed his knight was Marcus. My logical mind, my trusted processor, sputtered and crashed. It searched for any other explanation, any scenario that didn't involve the man I revered driving a knife into my back. But there was none. The data was irrefutable. The lockout, the stripped lab, the memo, Julian's pathetic apology. It was all part of a meticulously executed plan. Marcus had sold me, my work, and our future to the highest bidder. He had held the door open while Julian carted away the crown jewels. I stumbled back to my office, sinking into my chair. The city lights of Palo Alto glittered outside my window, a galaxy of indifferent stars. I had poured my soul into this place, into this work. I had believed we were building something to elevate humanity, to connect us in ways we never thought possible. And for what? To be discarded like a piece of obsolete hardware. The rage came slowly at first, a low hum beneath the crushing weight of shock and grief. It was the feeling of a system rebooting after a catastrophic failure. Running. Diagnostics identifying the corrupt files. Marcus's face swam in my mind's eye. His warm smile during our late-night brainstorming sessions. The proud clap on my shoulder when we'd achieved the first stable mind-to-text translation, his voice telling me, "You're the future of this company, Kay. The daughter I never had." Lies. All of it. Corrupted data. He and Julian had not just stolen my invention. They had stolen my trust, my past, my belief in the very foundations of my world. They thought they had erased me. They thought I would crumble, a brilliant but naive girl outplayed in the vicious world of corporate chess. As I sat there in the husk of my former life, the cold, quiet rage began to solidify. It wasn't a hot, messy emotion anymore. It was becoming something else. Something clean, something sharp, something logical. They had made a critical miscalculation. They had analyzed my personality, my idealism, my loyalty to Marcus, and concluded I would be a passive victim. They had forgotten one crucial detail. I designed Synapse. I built it from the motherboard up. I knew every line of its code, every secret pathway in its neural network. And in any sufficiently complex system, a creator always leaves a backdoor, a ghost in the machine, known only to them. A way back in. They thought they had taken everything. They were wrong. They had left me with the one thing I needed, a weapon. And as the first rays of dawn broke over the California hills, I wasn't Kaelen Vance, the discarded idealist anymore. I was the ghost of Ethereum, and I was coming back to haunt them. My revenge wouldn't be a messy, emotional outburst. It would be an algorithm, precise, devastating, and perfectly executed. They had taught me that business was just business. I was about to give them the lesson of their lives. The days that followed were a blur of beige and legalese. Two stern-faced men in ill-fitting suits served me at my apartment, their expressions, a mixture of pity and professional detachment. The documents they handed me were a masterclass in corporate castration. A non-disclosure agreement so restrictive it essentially forbade me from thinking too loudly about Ethereum. A non-compete clause that barred me from working in any field related to neurotechnology, bioinformatics, or computational linguistics anywhere in North America for the next 5 years. It was a professional death sentence, wrapped in a crisp, manila envelope. I was escorted out of my life as efficiently as a line of deprecated code. My corporate accounts vanished. My access to the Ethereum gym, the gourmet cafeteria, the quiet Zen garden where I'd untangled so many complex problems, all gone. I was in exile. The first week was a free-fall. I'd wake up and for a blissful, ignorant second, my mind would already be at the lab, wrestling with a particularly stubborn piece of Synapse's predictive text algorithm. Then the reality would crash down, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. The betrayal felt like a phantom limb. I kept reaching for the work, the team, the purpose, only to find nothing there but the aching void of its absence. I replayed every conversation with Marcus, every shared goal, every promise. His words, once a source of comfort and inspiration, were now laced with the bitter poison of deceit. I saw the subtle manipulations, the carefully worded deflections, the moments he'd steered me away from the company's financials, telling me to focus on the science, Kay. That's where you shine. He hadn't been protecting me from distraction. He'd been hiding the rot. The world celebrated my demise without even knowing my name. Tech journals lauded the OmniGen acquisition as a brilliant move. Julian was on the cover of Wired, smug and self-assured, peddling my dreams as his own. He spoke of OmniLink with a proprietary passion that made my stomach turn. He used my phrases, my analogies, my vision of a connected future. He was a parrot, mimicking the genius he had helped to cage. I hit rock bottom on a Tuesday. I was watching a live-streamed tech conference where OmniGen's CEO, the notoriously ruthless Kaelen Vance, no relation, a cosmic joke I didn't find funny, was parading Julian on stage. Kaelen was a predator, a titan of industry known for acquiring innovative companies and stripping them for parts. Seeing Marcus's company, our company, in his jaws was a special kind of hell. With Julian Croft's visionary leadership, Kaelen boomed, his voice dripping with false sincerity. OmniLink will not just revolutionize the market, it will define the future of human potential. I threw my coffee mug at the wall. It shattered, leaving a brown stain that dripped down like synthetic blood. The crash echoed in my silent apartment. And in that echo, something shifted. The grief, the despair, the helpless rage, it all began to coalesce. It was like watching iron filings align in the presence of a powerful magnet. The scattered pieces of my shattered self were being pulled together, not by hope, but by a cold, unifying purpose. They thought they had silenced me. They thought the legal documents and the public erasure were the end of the story. They had analyzed every variable except the most important one. They had taught me how to build the future, and in doing so, had given me the tools to destroy theirs. I walked over to the closet and pulled out a dusty, hard-shell Pelican case. Inside were the bones of Synapse, the original breadboard prototypes, the clunky first-generation headset, and a half-dozen encrypted hard drives containing my personal, off-network backups of the entire project, dated from the very beginning. I had always been meticulous about redundancy, but the key wasn't in the backups, it was in my memory. Months ago, during a late-night session, I had discovered a potential vulnerability in the firmware of the neural processing chip we were using. It was a hardware-level exploit, almost impossible to detect with a software scan. I reported it to Marcus, suggesting we delay our production schedule to source a more secure chip. He had dismissed my concerns. "We're too far along, Kay," he'd said, his tone unusually firm. "The risk is minimal. Just patch it in the OS and move on. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good." I had written a software patch as instructed. But I had also done something else. I had built a key for that vulnerability, a personal failsafe, a backdoor. I had embedded a tiny, elegant piece of code directly into the firmware of every prototype, including the final pre-production model they were now calling OmniLink. It was a ghost, invisible to their diagnostics, a whisper in the silicon, and it answered only to me. Julian, for all his programming skill, was a software man. He lived on the surface. He would never think to look for a trapdoor in the foundation. A smile, the first real one in weeks, touched my lips. It felt foreign, sharp. They hadn't just stolen my work, they had stolen an unstable, compromised version of it. They were sleeping on a digital volcano, and I was the only one who knew the eruption schedule. My mission crystallized. It wasn't about getting my job back. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about justice, delivered with the cold, irrefutable logic of a perfectly executed algorithm. I would let them build their gilded tower on my stolen ground. I would let them pour their billions into the launch, let them promise the world a new era of connection. And then, at the moment of their greatest triumph, I would burn it all down from the inside out, using the very technology they had taken from me. The first step was to disappear. Kaelen Vance, the victim, had to go offline. I paid the rest of my apartment lease in cash, packed the Pelican case, and liquidated what assets I had left. I rented a small, anonymous loft in a forgotten industrial district of Oakland, a place where the hum of the city would mask my own digital heartbeat. It was all exposed brick, steel beams, and a glorious, unmetered gigabit fiber connection sprouting from the wall like a weed. I paid for everything with cryptocurrency, routing it through a series of mixers until it was untraceable. I bought a new set of hardware, unassuming, powerful, and paid for in cash. I began to construct my digital war room. As I assembled my new command center, a new persona began to take shape in my mind. Kaelen Vance was dead. In her place was Nyx. In mythology, she was the goddess of the night, a primordial, shadowy figure from whom all other gods, even the powerful ones, were born and whom they feared. It was perfect. I would be the darkness from which their destruction would emerge. My first foray back into their world was cautious. I booted up a secure Tor browser and navigated to Ethereum's old internal servers, which were now integrated into OmniGen's sprawling network. Using the firmware exploit, I didn't hack my way in through the front door. I simply let myself in through the basement window I had built. Access granted. The words glowed on my new terminal, a sweet, satisfying song. I was in. I could see everything. The frantic emails between development teams, the revised launch schedules, Julian's panicked memos about minor integration bugs. My ghost was in their machine. I looked around my Spartan loft. The shattered pieces of my old life were gone. In their place was a new architecture, an architecture of ruin. The blueprints were laid out in my mind, a symphony of chaos with a 5-part structure. And the first note was about to be played. The rage was gone, replaced by a crystalline focus. This was no longer a messy emotional reaction. This was a project, my new project, and I would see it through to its logical, devastating conclusion. My new home was a cage of my own making, but it felt more liberating than my corner office ever had. The industrial loft in Oakland was my sanctuary and my command center. Sunlight streamed through the grimy, warehouse-style windows, illuminating, dust motes dancing in the air like stray bits of data. My setup was a stark island of cutting-edge technology in a sea of urban decay. 3 high-resolution monitors, a custom-built server rack humming softly in the corner, and miles of neatly managed cables. Here, I was no longer Kaelen Vance, the tragic footnote. I was Nyx, the architect of whispers and shadows. My first objective was to test the limits of my access. The firmware backdoor I'd created was even more effective than I had hoped. It gave me root-level privileges not just within the OmniLink project, but it also created a bridge. Because the technology was being integrated so deeply into OmniGen's infrastructure, my ghost could now wander the hallways of their entire corporate network. I was a phantom, walking unseen past their digital security guards and peering into any room I chose. Revenge, I decided, was a dish best served with 1,000 tiny cuts. A dramatic, immediate implosion would be satisfying, but it wouldn't be art. I wanted them to suffer. I wanted them to doubt themselves, to turn on each other, to feel the slow, creeping dread of a system failing for reasons they couldn't comprehend. I would orchestrate a technological haunting. I started with the OmniLink test logs. Julian, in his infinite arrogance, was running daily diagnostic simulations. I began to manipulate the data streams in infinitesimal ways. A single bit flipped here, a packet of data delayed by a few milliseconds there. The changes were so small they were statistically insignificant, easily dismissed as background noise or software bugs. The first reports started trickling into Julian's inbox a week later. I watched a silent observer as the emails flew. From lead QA tester to Julian Croft. Subject, anomaly in haptic feedback loop. Julian, we're seeing a persistent, non-reproducible lag in the haptic feedback module during deep state simulations. It's a sub 2 ms delay, well within acceptable parameters, but it's odd. It appears randomly and then vanishes. We can't pin it down. Probably a driver conflict. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. I smiled. The driver conflict was me, sipping tea in my Oakland loft and gently pushing the data packets out of sync. Next, I targeted the predictive text algorithm, one of the jewels of my original design. It was designed to anticipate a user's train of thought, finishing sentences and even pulling up relevant data before the user consciously asked for it. I began to introduce subtle errors. During a simulation for a financial projection, the algorithm would flawlessly predict every data point except one, where it would inexplicably transpose two numbers, turning a projected profit of $1.5 million into a loss of $5.1 million. The error would be caught and corrected by the QA team, but it would be logged as another bizarre, unexplainable glitch. Julian's responses to these reports became increasingly agitated. He was a man who believed in the purity of code, and my ghost was polluting his temple. He ordered his teams into endless rounds of code reviews and debugging sessions. They were searching for a bug in the software, unaware that the infestation was in the building's very foundation. They were chasing shadows. While they were distracted, I expanded my reach. I needed allies, or at least unwitting pawns, within the company. I remembered Sarah Jenkins, a brilliant but perpetually overlooked engineer from my old team. She was fiercely loyal to the project, my project, and had been demoted to a minor support role after the Omnigen acquisition. I knew she felt betrayed. I created a secure anonymous email account and a digital persona, Nix. The name felt right, a mysterious, powerful entity operating from the darkness. 2. sjenkinsomnigen.com. From Nick77proton.me. Subject, a ghost in the machine you. Don't know me, but I know you. I know you were one of the true architects of Synapse. I know you see what they've turned it into. They are chasing ghosts in the code because they are blind to the truth. The errors are not in the software. Look deeper. Check the hardware-level data packet transfers. Compare the source timestamps to the receipt timestamps in the main processor. There's a delay. Someone is listening. I hit send, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was my first real move, the first time my ghost was speaking to someone. For 2 days, there was silence. I began to fear I had miscalculated, that Sarah would report the strange email to security. Then a reply appeared. 2. Nick77@proton.me. From sjenkinsomnigen.com. Subject, a ghost in the machine. Who are you? It was all she wrote, but it was enough. It was a question, not an accusation. It was the beginning of a conversation. Nix, a friend of the original, Vision, a believer in ethical tech. They stole Kaelen Vance's work. Now they are trying to launch a flawed, unstable version of it, and they are going to fail. I can prove it. Over the next few weeks, I cultivated my relationship with Sarah. I fed her information, breadcrumbs of truth that she could independently verify. I pointed her toward the microsecond delays, the corrupted data packets, the anomalies that everyone else was dismissing. I never revealed who I was, positioning myself as an anonymous hacktivist who abhorred Omnigen's corporate malpractice. Sarah, disillusioned and hungry for a purpose, became my eyes and ears inside the company. She reported on the growing panic, the missed deadlines, and the mounting pressure from Kaelen Vance. The real twist, the one that solidified my resolve into something harder than steel, came from a deeper dive into Marcus's encrypted files. I had been avoiding them, the digital equivalent of touching a raw nerve. But I needed to understand the why. Greed seemed too simple an explanation for the man who had quoted Aristotle to me, who had spoken of technology's moral responsibilities. Late one night, I broke the encryption on his personal drive. I found his calendars, his private correspondences, and a folder labeled Ancora. It wasn't a project name. It was the name of a private experimental medical facility in Switzerland. The folder was filled with medical records, bills totaling in the millions, and desperate, heartbreaking emails between Marcus and a team of geneticists. His wife, Elena, a warm, kind woman who had always treated me like family, had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of frontotemporal dementia. Her mind, her very essence, was being unwritten by a cruel twist of biology. The Omnigen deal wasn't just about a golden parachute. Omnigen's biotech division was a world leader in experimental gene therapies. The deal included a provision, buried deep in the appendices, for a fully funded experimental treatment for Elena at the Ancora facility. He had sold my mind to save his wife's. The discovery knocked the wind out of me. I sat back, the glow of the monitor illuminating the stark lines of my face. It didn't excuse what he'd done. It didn't absolve him of the betrayal that had shattered my life. He could have come to me. We could have found another way. But he chose the path of deceit. He had sacrificed his professional daughter to save his wife. The knowledge was a bitter pill. It complicated the clean lines of my anger, introducing a tragic, messy variable. But it didn't change the equation. It only raised the stakes. My revenge was no longer just about punishing a thief and a traitor. It was about delivering a different kind of justice. Marcus had gambled with my future for a chance to save his. I would ensure he lost everything, so he would be forced to confront the true cost of his desperate, unforgivable choice. A new email from Sarah popped up, pulling me from my thoughts. Nix, they're panicking. Julian is convinced there's a saboteur. They're planning a full system diagnostic this weekend, a complete lockdown. They think they can trap the ghost. What do we do? I looked at the schematics of OmniLink on my screen. The small glitches I had been sowing were flowers of chaos. Now it was time to plant a tree. Nix. Don't worry, Sarah. A trap is a cage, and I have the key. This weekend, we're not going to hide from the ghost. We're going to give it a voice. I was about to turn their diagnostic into a demonstration. They wanted to find the bug? I would show them it wasn't a bug. It was a feature. My feature. And it was about to get a major upgrade. The lockdown was absolute. For 48 hours, the OmniLink project was sealed in a digital quarantine. No external network access. All developer terminals were monitored. They were hunting for me, a team of digital exorcists trying to expel a ghost they couldn't see or define. They swept the code, ran hardware diagnostics, and analyzed every byte of data, looking for the source of the anomalies that had plagued them for weeks. From my loft, I watched them through the narrow peephole of my firmware exploit, a silent god observing a frantic prayer ritual. They found nothing. Of course they didn't. They were looking for a flaw within the system, but I was the system. My backdoor wasn't an error. It was a fundamental property of the hardware they were using. It was like trying to find the bug that makes water wet. The failure of the diagnostic sent a shockwave of panic through the executive levels. Kaelen Vance, Omnigen's notoriously impatient CEO, was apoplectic. The multi-billion-dollar launch was just weeks away, and his flagship technology was seemingly possessed. I read the intercepted emails between him, Marcus, and Julian. Corbin's messages were brutal, filled with threats and ultimatums. Marcus's replies were placating and desperate. Julian's were a frantic mess of technical jargon and defensive posturing. The alliance, forged in my betrayal, was beginning to fracture under the pressure. This was the moment to escalate. My communication with Sarah had deepened. She trusted Nix implicitly now. She was my inside agent, feeding me real-time information on the mood and the frantic attempts to find a solution. The time had come to offer them one. Nix, they are looking for the wrong thing. The instability isn't a single piece of code. It's a resonance issue between the primary processor and the data buffer. It's creating phantom data packets. They need a patch that can isolate and scrub these phantoms before they corrupt the stream. Sarah, a resonance issue? That's obscure. Can you write it? Nix, I already have. I sent her a small, elegantly crafted piece of code. On the surface, it was a sophisticated diagnostic and repair tool designed to do exactly what I had described. It would genuinely solve the minor glitches I had been creating. The lag would disappear. The data transposition errors would vanish. To Julian and his beleaguered team, it would look like a miracle, a lifeline thrown to them in the middle of a storm. But buried deep within its compiled binary, cloaked by layers of obfuscation, was its true purpose. It was my Trojan Horse. The code didn't just target the OmniLink system. It was designed to exploit the very nature of OmniGen's integrated network. Once run with administrator privileges on the OmniLink server, it would use that trusted position to propagate itself across OmniGen's entire corporate infrastructure. It would silently install itself in their financial servers, their human resources database, their executive email archives, and even the building's automated security systems. It would grant me, the highest level of clearance to every secret they had. It was the master key to their kingdom, and I was about to trick them into placing it in the lock themselves. Sarah, this is beautiful code. I've never seen anything like it. But how do I get them to use it? Julian would never accept a solution from an anonymous source. Nix, you won't give it to him. You will make him think it was his idea. In your next team meeting, suggest they look for a resonance cascade. Use the terms I gave you. When he dismisses it, subtly guide him. Mention a research paper from a German university on quantum decoherence in silicon processors. The paper doesn't exist, but he'll look for it. When he can't find it, he'll be intrigued. Then you discover the solution yourself during a late-night session. Present this code as your own work. He is desperate. He will not question a miracle. Sarah was terrified, but she was also exhilarated. This was her chance to be seen, to reclaim a piece of the project she had cared so much about. She agreed. I watched it unfold through a compromised webcam on a meeting room computer. I saw Sarah, her voice trembling slightly at first, planting the seed. I saw Julian, arrogant and dismissive as I knew he would be. Then I saw the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. The next day, as predicted, Sarah heroically presented the patch. Julian, after a cursory and ultimately useless review, ran the code. The effect was instantaneous. The glitches stopped. The system stabilized. The test logs came back clean for the first time in a month. Julian was hailed as a savior who had wrestled the demon into submission. Sarah received a pat on the back and a minor bonus. And I received the keys to everything. I spent the next week living a double life. By day, I was Kay, a ghost haunting a loft, living on takeout and coffee. By night, I was Nix, the omniscient spirit of OmniGen. I walked through their most protected files, a silent tourist in a museum of corporate malfeasance. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. This wasn't just a ruthless acquisition, it was a full-blown conspiracy. I found the original, unredacted agreement between Marcus and Omnigen. He hadn't just secured a treatment for his wife. He had also been given a massive off-the-books signing bonus, funneled through a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. It was pure, unadulterated greed, wrapped in a cloak of tragic necessity. My empathy for him curdled into cold contempt. I uncovered Julian's side deal. He hadn't just been a willing pawn. He had been feeding Omnigen information for over a year before the buyout, actively sabotaging my other projects to ensure Synapse was the only viable asset left. His reward was a guaranteed seat on Omnigen's executive board after a 2-year integration period. But the masterstroke, the heart of their rotten enterprise, was a plan to defraud their own shareholders. I found encrypted communications between Marcus, Julian, and a high-ranking executive inside Omnigen. They had knowingly faked performance data to inflate the projected value of the Synapse technology, securing a much higher acquisition price. Their plan was to ride the wave of the post-launch stock surge, cash out their inflated options, and then, using Julian's inside knowledge, short the stock when the technology inevitably failed to meet its impossible-to-achieve projections. They weren't just going to get rich, they were going to burn the whole company down on their way out and get rich a second time. And their ultimate target was Kaelen Vance himself. They planned to leak information that would pin the failure on his aggressive and reckless leadership, paving the way for a hostile takeover by their own silent partners. My hands grew cold as I read the final pieces of the puzzle. This was a symphony of betrayal on a scale I had never fathomed. My own destruction was just the opening act. My plan for revenge had been to destroy the OmniLink technology. But that was no longer enough. Destroying the project would hurt them, but they would survive, their stolen fortunes intact. They would paint it as a technological failure, a noble effort that simply didn't pan out. No, that wasn't justice. Justice was not just taking away their new toy. Justice was tearing down the entire corrupt temple, exposing the rot in the foundation, and ensuring every single one of them was buried in the rubble. The information about Marcus's wife, Elena, resurfaced in my mind. The tragic motivation that had briefly complicated my feelings now seemed like a pathetic excuse. He wasn't a desperate husband making a single terrible choice. He was a criminal who had used his wife's tragedy as a cover for his own boundless greed. He had sacrificed me not for love, but for money and power, with love as a convenient alibi. There was no more complexity. There was only the target. I began to assemble the data, creating a comprehensive and irrefutable dossier of their crimes. The emails, the secret ledgers, the faked performance charts, the offshore bank transfers. I was no longer just a saboteur. I was a prosecutor, building a case for the trial of the century in the court of public opinion and federal law. The OmniLink global launch event was scheduled in 1 week. It was to be a massive spectacle, live-streamed, from San Francisco, with investors, press, and the public watching. It was meant to be their coronation. I smiled. It would be their execution. Sarah sent me a final nervous message. Sarah. Nix, it's working perfectly. The launch is a go. Corbin is ecstatic. Julian is insufferable. Are you sure about this? What's the endgame? I looked at the dossier I had compiled, a digital bomb of pure truth. Nix. The endgame isn't to stop the launch, Sarah. It's to make sure it's a launch no one will ever forget. They think they fixed the ghost. But the ghost is now the whole machine. My Trojan Horse hadn't just given me access. It had given me control. Control of the presentation screens. Control of the demo units. Control of the network that would stream their triumph to the entire world. I wasn't going to pull the fire alarm. I was going to burn the building down, while everyone was watching. The day of the launch arrived with a classic San Francisco fog, a cool gray blanket draped over the city. To the world, it was the dawn of a new technological era. To me, in my Oakland loft, it was Judgment Day. The air in my sanctuary hummed with the quiet power of my servers and the frantic energy of my own heartbeat. On my central monitor, a multi-panel display showed a dozen different angles of the Moscone Center. The frantic backstage preparations, the buzz of the arriving press, the polished stage where my life's work, or a perverted effigy of it, was about to be unveiled. I had slept for 2 hours, a deep, dreamless sleep, and had woken with a preternatural calm. The anger and grief that had fueled me for months had been transmuted into something else entirely. Pure, crystalline purpose. This was not an act of rage. It was the execution of a final, elegant algorithm. The variables were all in place. The conditions were all met. All that was left was to run the program. My Trojan Horse had performed beyond my wildest dreams. I was the ghost in every part of their machine. I had a command line interface to the main presentation screen, the teleprompters, the audio system, and most beautifully, to the firmware of the 20 OmniLink demo units that were pre-fitted on a selection of volunteer tech journalists on stage. Sarah, my unwitting accomplice, had sent me the final schedule. Kaelen Vance would speak, followed by Marcus, and then Julian would perform the grand finale, a live demonstration of OmniLink's power. My symphony of destruction was timed to the second. The event began. The lights dimmed. A sweeping orchestral score filled the auditorium, and Kaelen Vance strode onto the stage, his silhouette framed by a massive screen displaying the shimmering OmniLink logo. He was a master showman, his voice resonating with power and confidence. "Today is not just about a new product," he boomed, his image broadcast to millions around the globe. "It is about a new paradigm, a world without keyboards, without screens, without barriers, a world where your mind is the final interface. We call it OmniLink." The crowd applauded wildly. I let him have his moment. I let him build the hype, inflate the bubble, climb to the very peak of his hubris. He spoke of vision, of progress, of a future connected by thought alone. Then he introduced the father of that vision. Marcus Thorne walked onto the stage. He looked older, worn down by the stress and the secrets, but he summoned a paternal warmth for the cameras. He spoke of Ethereum's humble beginnings and the long road to this incredible achievement. He mentioned his pride in his team. As he spoke, I felt a final fleeting pang of the memory of the man I once revered. It vanished as he smiled his false smile. He was a stranger to me now. Then came Julian. He practically bounced onto the stage, high on the adrenaline of his impending triumph. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. "Thank you, Marcus," he said, his voice slick with false humility. "For years, this was just a dream, a theoretical possibility. But my team and I, we never gave up. We pushed the boundaries of what was possible to bring you a technology that will change everything." This was my cue. The first movement of my symphony was about to begin. As Julian launched into the technical specifics, I initiated the first command. Behind him, the massive screen displaying the OmniLink logo flickered. For a split second, it was replaced by a different image, a screenshot of an email. From Julian Croft to Marcus Thorne. Subject, the KV problem. Don't worry, she suspects nothing. She trusts you completely. By the time she realizes what's happened, we'll be celebrating with Kaelen and she'll be a forgotten chapter. The image vanished as quickly as it had appeared. It was so fast that most people in the audience probably thought it was a simple presentation glitch. But I saw the flicker of confusion in Julian's eyes as he glanced over his shoulder. I saw Marcus standing in the wings, stiffen. The seed of doubt was planted. Julian nervously continued, moving toward the live demonstration. But don't take my word for it, he said, forcing a smile. Let's show you what OmniLink can do. He gestured to the journalists on stage, all wearing the sleek silver diadems I had designed. Our volunteers are currently thinking about a simple concept, a household object. OmniLink will translate those thoughts, in real time, onto the screen for you all to see. This was the second movement. As Julian gave the command, OmniLink, engage! As I activated my custom script, my code bypassed their intended household object demonstration entirely. Instead, it dove into the shallow, surface-level anxieties of the volunteers' minds and projected them. Instead of apple, chair, or book, a stream of unfiltered consciousness filled the screen. Did I leave the oven on at home? This free coffee tastes terrible. I hope my ex isn't watching this. This headset is messing up my hair. Seriously, how much longer is this going to take? I have a deadline. The audience tittered, then began to laugh, assuming it was a planned, humorous part of the demo. Julian's face went white. He frantically typed on a console, trying to override the system, but he was a user trying to argue with the administrator. I had locked him out. A minor calibration issue, he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. Let's move on to the core of the presentation. Now for the third movement, the crescendo. With Julian floundering, I seized control of the main screen completely. The OmniLink logo dissolved, and in its place, I projected the crown jewels of my dossier. First, the Cayman Islands bank statements under Marcus Thorne's Shell Corporation, showing the multi-million-dollar deposit from OmniGen. Then, the timeline of Julian's emails to OmniGen, detailing his year-long corporate espionage. Then, the faked performance data, displayed side by side with the real, unimpressive metrics from my original backups. Finally, the encrypted chat logs between Marcus and Julian, outlining their entire conspiracy to defraud the shareholders and oust Kaelen Vance. The plan was laid bare for the world to see, a step-by-step guide to their breathtaking corruption. The auditorium fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The only sound was the frantic clicking of cameras, as the press corps realized they were witnessing the corporate scandal of the decade. Kaelen Vance, who had been watching from the front row, stared at the screen, his face a mask of volcanic fury. He understood now. He hadn't acquired a company. He'd been infiltrated by a viper's nest, and he had been the ultimate target. With the evidence displayed for all to see, I executed the fourth and final movement. It was time to deliver the coup de grace to the technology itself. I sent a single encrypted command to the firmware of every OmniLink unit in the building, and, through their network, to every unit in their inventory worldwide. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't a wipe. It was something far more elegant. It was a lock. The command activated a dormant encryption routine I had hidden in the firmware. It instantly wrapped the device's core operating system in a layer of unbreakable 256-bit AES encryption. The only key, the only thing in the world that could unlock it, was a 64-character alphanumeric string that existed in only one place: my mind. In an instant, every multi-thousand-dollar OmniLink device became a beautifully designed, utterly useless paperweight. The multi-billion-dollar project was now a multi-billion-dollar brick. As the final step, I flashed one last message onto every screen in the auditorium, a message that replaced the damning evidence of their crimes. It was my signature, my reclaiming of the narrative. Technology built on lies will only ever tell the truth. Your access has been denied. Kaelen Vance. Then I severed my connection. Nix vanished. I shut down my systems, initiated a program that wiped my temporary servers clean, and physically destroyed the hard drives. My work was done. I didn't stick around to watch the immediate aftermath. I didn't need to. I saw the headlines later. Omnigen's stock plummeted into a freefall that triggered automatic trading halts. The SEC launched a massive investigation. Federal agents raided their headquarters before the end of the day. Kaelen Vance's career was incinerated in the blast. Julian was arrested on stage, his pathetic attempts to blame a highly sophisticated cyber attack drowned out by the irrefutable evidence I had provided. Marcus Thorne was ruined. He lost the company, his fortune, and his reputation. I read later that the Swiss clinic, funded by the now-frozen Omnigen deal, had dropped his wife from their program. It was a brutal, tragic outcome, but it was the direct consequence of his own choices. He had gambled, and he had lost everything. There was no satisfaction in it, only a grim sense of cosmic balance restored. I walked away from the loft, carrying nothing but a single backpack. The ghost of Kaelen Vance, the victim, had been laid to rest. The persona of Nyx, the Avenger, was no longer needed. 6 months later, I sat in a small coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, sketching designs on a tablet. It was the blueprint for a small, open-source neural interface designed to help people with mobility issues. My new company had 2 employees, me and a very bright recent graduate, and was funded by my own modest savings. My name had been cleared, as the evidence I leaked anonymously made it obvious I was the original creator and the ultimate whistleblower. A news report played on the corner TV, a retrospective on the Omnigen collapse. They called the unknown saboteur a master hacker, a digital ghost. They never knew it was the very person whose work they had stolen. I didn't feel the thrill of victory or the heat of vengeance. I felt quiet. The storm had passed, leaving clean air in its wake. My revenge hadn't just been about destruction. It had been about reclamation. I had taken back my work, my name, and my future. They had tried to erase me, but in the end, the only thing erased was their empire of lies. I took a sip of my coffee and went back to my designs, building something new, something honest, something mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt free.